What time is it?
Now I should just switch it on here.
Yeah, you're right next to the
And then, and so I communicated with him.
All the time now? I didn't.
So that
Jim's still alive, yeah. He's still kicking. Well, he really perked up.
I haven't heard anything about him.
Jim, are you coming in? Jim, somebody, some friend of his was running Jim was doing that.
So we
It was shot putting that still.
Are you going to shower on Sunday?
Yeah, and he was throwing in.
Really? Why can't I come later?
Yeah. He had two lives.
I was surprised.
Great wife, second marriage. She knew him in school. So they're, doing what they have to do. But I'll tell you, it's a mess out. She had him going to football and driving to football. I lost touch with him for a long time, and then he started doing it probably about 15 years. And so we corresponded with him. And then more and more. So the last time, well, Dad was a newspaper.
She could be in next.
Yeah, you know, Myers was time. His team was owned the newspaper. Jim said,
I'll be here shortly,
not a
and I
happy
think we have
time.
seats for everyone.
Dad was
And just by
out.
looking at this crowd, it seems to be this
And not a happy
record number of people that we've had speakers
I
events.
guess.
So yeah, it's very exciting. Tonight, as you know, our subject is postcards, and postcards from the past that tell a story about the history of not only our island but Newport Beach and other places. And now to think that that was the only way people really communicated, and now it's Instagram or Snapchat. Isn't that that's the exactly. So some of you have met Jeff Delaney, who is the author of many books which are in the store tonight, and he has written one which is called Postcards from. Okay, it's great. We've seen the book before. And of course you know Conrad and Conrad's family all here tonight, which is really nice. And he's helped us out and moderated, I think, for every event that we've had, which is very much appreciative of that. He can never retire. And before, so Conrad is also a collector of postcards, and so he's going to be very interested and interstate. I will. And before I put this down, I don't know if all of you have met Jennifer Keel. She's our assistant director, and it's one of the best things that's happened to our museum this year. It's great. She's made our job much easier, and we're having a lot of success as a result of that. So I'm going to now turn it over to you guys, and I don't know who's going to go first. Oh, Conrad.
Proposed this topic surely over a year ago, and I'm glad we have an opportunity to discuss it tonight. I personally collect early postcards, but all of my postcards pretty much are early turn-of-the-century African-American postcards, which really don't have much to do with what we're talking about tonight. But I do have an understanding of the progression of early postcards and a history about them, so I feel comfortable with the topic, and I'm going to give you a little brief outline of early cards, which hopefully won't, sort of duplicate what Jeff is going to talk about. But it's interesting that postcards are something that I really find a fascination with, and I'm glad that we have Jeff here. And I know Shirley mentioned to you that he's actually written 3 books. I think one was Newport Beach postcards, and then one that's Newport's Balboa and Balboa Peninsula, and then a third one is Newport Beach Then and Now. So he's covered it all, and he's a local resident, so we're happy to have him as an expert here. And he has a wonderful collection of postcards, so I'm so pleased. I mean, frankly, when Shirley first said, well, let's do this, and Jeff said he wasn't available, and I actually talked to him and sort of like said, so he delayed a vacation out of town to do this, and I much appreciate that. Okay, so I thought I would start with a brief review of old postcards, and all of these are part of Bob Lambert, who's a board member's collection. He has a wonderful collection of really segregated into Balboa Island, Balboa, and Coeur d'Almar. So I sort of picked through the early cards just to try to give you a little representation of what he has. So I'll start with a brief history, and then we'll sort of run through the cards quickly. But most of us don't really consider how we communicated 100 years ago, before the common use of phones, and 100 years before the introduction of the smartphone and the technology of Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, Twitter. The fact is that the average American had a long history of communicating with brief messages and or photographic images. That medium, of course, was the postcard. The standard format for a postcard is 3.5 inches by 5.5 inches, which really doesn't leave a lot of space for any kind of a message. Postcards were used much in the same way that we use social media today, to communicate images and to send brief messages. And the messages were usually about the same thing as social media is. It was special events of the day, vacation destinations and resorts, places of unusual interest, birthdays, holidays, national parks, landmarks, everyday small town as well as big city scenes, family gatherings, commemorative events, of course, as a forum for advertising. Hotels, motels, resorts, restaurants, real estate, etc. So to begin with, in 1861, I should say, the outbreak of the Civil War, the first postcard received a patent. And by 1873, the post office started printing a postcard with a 1-cent stamp. That was a simple 5.5 by 3.5 piece of paper that had 1-cent stamp printed on it. But if you didn't want to use the government's postcard, you had to use a private postcard, and the charge was 2 cents instead of 1 cent, which, you know, in those days was a big difference, and that was the same price as sending a letter. Then in 1898, Congress said, well, let's make a change in the rules and allow private postcards to be sent out for the same 1 cent as the federal U.S. Postal Service postcards. That accompanied with this fact that they also said that, you know, there really shouldn't be a surcharge for rural delivery of postcards. So they said, we will send out postcards for 1 cent, either federal postcards or private postcards, and they will also be sent to rural areas. And that really started to promote the use of postcards. And in urban areas, oftentimes, postcards and mail in general was delivered twice a day. And Bob Lambert says he's actually seen cards where it said, I'll see you this afternoon from here, meaning they were going to take the trolley back to Pasadena or whatever. And they were, you know, fairly confident that someone would actually read the postcard before they did. Just kind of fascinating. Anyway, so Congress granted that right for the 1 cent postcard, but until 2007, you could not write on the address side of the card. The address side of the card was strictly for the use of an address. Some of the cards show that you could put a return address on that side, but you couldn't write any message. And the problem is that the early cards, as a consequence, either they made a space or a little written message, or people had to write over the image. And so the early cards often are kind of messy because they've written over the image of the card. So I'm going to just take you through 5 early cards and then turn this over thing to Jeff, and hopefully nobody falls asleep before we get through this thing. But anyway, the first card that I have here is an image. Let's see, get to my notes. This is titled "Along the Beach: Greetings from Balboa Beach, California," and the postmark on this is 1906. So, you know, look, basically 109 years ago. So, if you note the writing, yeah, there it is, 2006. If you note the writing on the card itself, let's go back to the other side, 1906. If you go back to the card itself, you'll see that, you know, the writing is on the card, and it reads, "Laura, Esther, and I took a run down here this afternoon. This is East New, N-E-W capital P-O-R-T, all well." So I think people were not sure if it was Newport or Newport, you know, which is kind of curious. And I said that, you know, this is an example of an earlier card where the address is on one side and a short message on the other. And my guess is this is maybe China Cove. I don't know, maybe Seymour would know what this is, but they probably traveled down here by canoe, so I doubt it was too far south out of the harbor. And if you look, Jennifer, at the other side of the card, which is kind of curious, note that it's addressed to one individual in El Paso, Illinois. No street address, no zip, no nothing. And frankly, the far side of the card shows that it was you know, endorsed in El Paso, and obviously it was delivered just with that address, which is great. Anyway, so, okay, card number 2. All right, so again, note the written message, if we can flip to the other side. The written message is on the picture side of the card, and I kind of love this message because it's a little sassy. The card reads, it's probably hard to really get it all, but the card reads, "Just kiss yourself goodbye and go home and go to work. This is too fine a place for you, don't you think?" It's just, I love it. And if you note that the card, it says on the reverse side, was designed by a Walt M. Reeves, who apparently was an arts and crafts mission period artist. I really couldn't find any definitive information on him, but if you look at the reddish-brown image, I think it may be a woodcut, like a redwood burl or something. I'm not sure what it is, but yeah, maybe. I'm not sure, but it's kind of an odd card. But if you note again, the address is a simple address, and that was all that was put on that side of the card. No zip, no nothing. I mean, this at least has an address, whereas the El Paso, Illinois card didn't even have a, street. Anyway, so let's move on to the third card. So I go back now to post 1907. The new law allowed a printed line to be split or divided on the back of the card, with the right side reserved for the address and the left side for the correspondence. So with this, then obviously you didn't have to mar the image with correspondence. And with more room to write, consumers became more aggressive in using postcards as a means to communicate. And according to U.S. official postal office records, by 1913, almost 1 billion cards were sent out annually by mail, and that's well over 10 times the population of the United States, which is a pretty incredible statistic. Okay, so now back to this card. I love this card for a couple of reasons. This is, not only a captivating image, but it's a good example of what they refer to as real photo postcards. So amateur as well as professional photographers printed postcards on postcard stock. In fact, some professional photographers specialized in this format. You have to remember, we're talking all over the United States, but there were many areas where photographers who were professionals would specialize just in this genre. Anyway, so in 1903, Kodak began producing a camera called the Model 3A, which created a postcard-sized negative, making it easier to print directly onto postcard stock. So, Kodak made its money really in negatives and their paper more than in their cameras. They accommodated the sale of negatives and their paper stock by providing cheap cameras. But, this provided a way for people professionals as well as amateurs, to directly put postcards on stock paper. And this 1907 format allows the address and the message to be on the same side of the card. And the fascinating thing about this card is that it reads on the reverse. It's a little hard to read, but I did my best to translate it, but I'm pretty close. It reads, "Monday morning, am going for a swim. Can you find Bert and I in the picture? This was our picnic day at Rocky Point. Am sorry you folks were not here to enjoy it." I guess we'll let the... Okay, so many thanks for the picture. I guess, some kind of a pitcher or jug of some sort. It came all right. And then it says, 54 went on the picnic. We are having such a jolly time. Hope you are well. Love, Della. And Ma. And yourself, and sign Ma, I should say. Now, there's a couple of things about the flip side of this card that I love. If we can go back, Jennifer. Okay. Now, note that the full length dresses, but also note the fancy bonnets and the cinched waistlines. And then if you look really hard, you can notice that several of these ladies, like here, and I think there's one over a little farther that way, there, actually have their picnic baskets ready to open. Now, I don't know, Jennifer, if we can do this, show the whole photo, but she says, "Can you find Bert and I?" And she wound up marking Bert, and let's see, where is I? There she is. So undoubtedly, this is, I think I had 25 or 26 people in this picture. So this is probably a professional photographer who was paid to do this. And so the whole idea was he would take this picture, and then 54 people with these cards, because they had fun things, and you can't really see it, but it says, "I'm having a perfectly wonderful time. I have learned to swim, and I'm learning to dive. But diving is so sudden that I usually swallow about a quart or so of water. Have you been on your vacation yet? I'm sorry I couldn't go swimming with you." So it's a little braggadocious and a little bit, honest, but it's kind of a fun card. And I want to say, if you look again on the reverse side of the pavilion, you can see that the pavilion really basically sat pretty much right over the water. I mean, the entire building was basically over the water. Pardon? I didn't. Berkeley. Okay. I actually found a card in Bob Lambert's collection which was really fun. It was written to Yosemite National Park, Camp Curry, California, and it was delivered to someone who was working there in the summertime from Newport Beach, which I think is a great card. But it shows you how, like the Pasco, Illinois, or El Paso, Illinois thing, how, cards got delivered even though they didn't have much of an address. But I tried to look up whether this Fremont was a slave ship or whatever, and I don't really know. But the fascinating thing is there were a lot of cargo ships that in later years, were repurposed, and it's possible this was one of those ships that brought in lumber and then maybe took out agricultural products, because that was pretty commonplace in the Newport Harbor area. But anyway, I wanted to show those 5 cards and kind of the progression up to the time where you could have a full picture on the one side and your message was on the other. And now I will stop boring you, and I will turn this over to Jeff Delaney for the main part of our topic.
Good evening, everybody. By the way, the rope in that one card was the lifeguard at the time. That was all they had, was that rope to hang on to. I'll introduce myself. I was here 2 years ago, but some of you might not have been here. And I want to avoid the inevitable question, am I one of the Delaneys of the Delaney restaurant, Delaney Fish Market? I'm not. I don't even really like fish. I'm more of a pizza guy. I grew up I was born in Newport. I'm a Hogue baby. Grew up in Costa Mesa. My dad was a pharmacist. My mom worked at the Broadway in Fashion Island for 20 years. I have 7 siblings: Steve, Mark, Beth, Ellen, Mike, Sean, Teresa, and Jeff. And I started collecting postcards because my wife nudged me into it. We were on Catalina Island in Sugarloaf Books, and she caught me rifling through a postcard book of Catalina and elbowed me and said, you like to collect things, you should collect postcards. So I had permission, which was pretty cool. So the next day I jumped on eBay and discovered a new world of postcards. And I think what I liked about it the most is the dichotomy of the objective photo on the front with the subjective experience on the back. And in reading some of Conrad's cards, I always have the feeling when I look at old pictures from a century ago that time separates me from those people so much that I probably couldn't even interact with them very well, just because our language would be different. And then you read the cards, and they're worried about the same things then that they're worried about now, getting sunburned at the beach, or that sort of thing, or a family member who's sick. And so postcards for me also bridge the gap. They show me that people are much the same today as they were 100 years ago. And also, as Conrad touched on, they really preserve a history. I just turned 50, and I don't want to be, the old guy saying, get off my lawn, and the younger generation isn't preserving history. But I get that sense sometimes that with everything going digital, books are digital, music's digital, films are digital, that bookshelves are empty now. And I wonder how much of this information will slip away because of that. But anyway, let's look at some postcards. I brought quite a few, so if I go on too long, just the Dory Fishing Fleet, founded in 1891 and continues to operate today in its original location, just west of the Newport Pier. It has been designated a historical landmark by the Newport Beach Historical Society. The railroad didn't operate on Sundays, allowing fishermen and strollers to enjoy the pier. In the early 1930s, fishing from the Newport Pier was one of the city's most popular tourist attractions. In 1939, a tropical storm swept away 500 feet of the pier's outer end. Today's municipal pier was built the following year. The First National Bank was erected in 1913 to replace the State Bank of Newport, which was heavily damaged with explosives used by 3 bungling burglars in June of the previous year. The trio managed to escape, but left most of the money behind. Open only during the summer months, the Newport Hotel, built by McFadden in 1893 and shown here in 1912, entertained fashionable guests who enjoyed its large dining room. Previously a schoolhouse, this building just east of the Newport Pier was rented by the city in 1912 for $200 a month to be used as a city hall, before finally being purchased in December of the same year. 1912. Here's another view of our first city hall, seen on the right, this time in 1939. Looking west from the base of the Newport Pier in 1944. The 2 buildings on the right, constructed in the 1920s, still stand and contribute greatly to the area's charm. This is a similar view from 1947. Add more cars and the view would be much the same today. And another from 1955. A malt shop occupies the space now taken by 21 Oceanfront Restaurant. I've never ponied up the cash for dinner at 21 Oceanfront, but if the malt shop was still there, I'd be a regular customer. Lido Island in the distance was purchased by W.K. Parkinson in 1923 for $45,000. He spent $261,000 filling the land with dredging materials. Wanting to use Lido for commercial purposes, he ignored any proposition not along those lines. In 1926, he sold the property to William Clark Crittenden for $1.25 million. Lido Island, visible on the left of this image from 1934. Public improvements were made to Lido, including sidewalks, curbs, pavements, streetlights, water and sewage mains, an underground wiring system for telephone and electric service, pleasure piers, and a bridge connecting the island to the mainland. But the economic depression resulted in few lots sold. The dory fishermen worked at night, delivering their catch as the sun rises. In the old days, the wives would sell their husbands' wares, as in this image from 1931. The dories were beached during World War II. Fishermen remained active on both piers, commercial fishing vessels, and from the surf. The pavilion in 1907. In the spring of 1905, the structure was built by Chris McNeil for the Newport Bay Investment Company. Lumber for the pavilion had to be barged in, as neither a railway nor a wagon road to Balboa existed at the time. On July 4th, 1906, the Pacific Electric ran their first train to Balboa, where a giant barbecue welcomed passengers. Nearly 1,000 beachgoers took the 1-hour ride from LA that day, mostly from Pasadena. Pasadena Day at Balboa, August 6, 1908, is written in pencil on the bottom right of this card. Dorothy Fisher wrote her impressions of the day on the flip side. Bald heads are fine for spiders. Get your candy from the candy kit. Rubber balls are just fine for stooping people. Conductors are very fond of crackers. Pasadena and all its belongings were down in Balboa on that Memorial Day. I'm cheating on this one. This isn't a postcard. It's just a really good image, and so I threw it in. In a last-minute effort to accommodate visitors arriving on the Pacific Electric, the 15-room Balboa Hotel on the far right is rumored to have been built in just 10 days. I'm sure it was very safe. In a last-minute effort to accommodate visitors arriving on the Pacific Electric, the 15-room When the Balboa Hotel failed to provide sufficient accommodations, pioneer realtor Everett Chase established a tent city on the east side of Main Street between Balboa Boulevard and the beach. In 1912, Chase built the little yellow houses with Japanese curtains at Balboa Boulevard and Cypress Streets. The yellow houses rented during the busy summer season for between $8.50 and $12.50. By the early 1930s, his initial 24 cabins had expanded to 61. The middle structure on the left is the Netherlands Apartments, originally constructed in East Newport by John Mewers. Deciding Balboa would be a better location, he had the structure dismantled and moved to Main Street in 1912. Note the Pacific Electric red car in the background on the far right. While the boardwalk still exists on the bay side west of the pavilion, this portion east of the structure is but a memory. Years before the fun zone appeared on the bay side, visitors enjoyed a Ferris wheel on the ocean side of the peninsula, as seen in this postcard from 1924. This is another view from the same year, 1924. Postmarked July 28, 1910, Lucy, last name lost to history, wrote to her friend Florence, "I was awfully disappointed that you couldn't come down Tuesday, and I'm more than sorry that we can't arrange another day. We have something planned every day this week." Motorboating on the bay around 1909. The Balboa Pier was constructed in 1905, concurrent with the pavilion, as an added attraction for visitors taking the train down from Los Angeles. June 15th, 1924. Dear Ida, my sister and I spent today here, saw the bathing girls parade. Such pretty girls. My, there was a crowd. So many in bathing togs. I got the back of my neck all sunburned. And here's what Ida saw. Bathing beauty contests were part of day-long festivities arranged by the Chamber of Commerce and Madame LaRue Osgood to attract visitors to Balboa. Madame Osgood had to import girls for the annual beauty contest because local girls would never be seen in such costumes. A view down Main Street from the Balboa Pier, I especially like the older gentleman standing on the base of the light post to catch a glimpse of the bathing beauties. The Balboa Pharmacy opened in 1920 on the southeast corner of Central Avenue and Main Street. Louis Addleston was the new druggist. Within 2 years, he sold the business to Walter Eastlack. In 1924, Eastlack opened Balboa Pharmacy No. 2 on the northwest corner of the same intersection in the newly completed Louis W. Briggs building. Since his lease on the first pharmacy ran another year, there were 2 pharmacies in Balboa for the 1924 season. In 1928, Eastlack sold Balboa Pharmacy No. 2 to Mickey Walter and Alphonse Haman. The pavilion has been home to many ventures over its history, including restaurants, sports fishing, offices, an art museum, gambling parlors, and bowling alleys.
What's fascinating too is that if you look at the colors, because they were added, that they differ. One will be green for the roof, one will be red for the roof, one is gray for the roof. It's fascinating because they tried to create something that looked like, the natural colors. No one really knew, I don't think, that was painting it in what the real color was.
During the 1910s, a barber shop took up residence in the pavilion. It employed an infamous barber named Lucky Tiger Jack, so named because of his propensity to indulge heavily in his Lucky Tiger hair tonic. To many, the Green Dragon, on the far left, was the hub of the town, the social, cultural, and political center of activity. A popular destination for lunch, it was perhaps more popular for the bootleg liquor served in its back booths. On the back is written, "My heart feels fine here, and I'm full of pep." Main Street, 1915. The building under the flagpole in the distance is the original Balboa Theater, built in 1913. In 1916, Mrs. W.A. Osgood, better known by her theatrical name of Madame LaRue, managed the theater until it closed in 1928, the same year the Ritz Theater opened around the corner. In 1910, F.W. Harding built the Perfection Apartments, shown here on the top right. Main Street, 1928, from the Balboa Pier. It's difficult to see without a magnifying glass, but a band is set up right in the middle of the street, playing for a holiday crowd. The Balboa Inn in 1931. Constructed just west of the Balboa Pier in 1929, it was the finest hotel on the Orange County coast and the favored spot of movie stars and dignitaries. The Rendezvous Ballroom, seen on the right, was built in 1928 by developers Harry Pop Tudor and Ray Burlingame as a competing dance hall to the Pavilion. The construction cost was $200,000. Visitors, like the young ladies pictured here, filled the beach by day and the ballroom's dance floor by night. A busy day on Main Street during the Great Depression. While many small towns went bankrupt and vanished from the map, Balboa survived on its three major industries: dancing, gambling, and bootleg liquor. The intersection of Palm and Balboa Boulevard in the early 1940s. The Safeway Market on the left opened in 1938. By 1945, the same building housed the Balboa Market, a local favorite for 68 years. The building was torn down in 2013. The focus of this 1937 image is the Story Building and the Casino Cafe. In the 1920s and 30s, about half the businesses on Main Street operated some form of gambling. Roulette, slot machines, and punch boards, all conveniently located near the cash register. While gambling was in violation of state law, it was legalized and licensed in Balboa by city ordinance. Henry Huntington operated the Red Car Line as a loss leader to connect city dwellers to his real estate developments in outlying areas. When those land holdings became fully developed in the early 1920s, the least used red car lines were discontinued. The last red car left Balboa on June 9, 1940, and the tracks were paved over, as seen in this image from 1943. Main Street during the war. A USO club is located next to the Penny Arcade. Balboa was a popular destination for men on leave from the nearby Santa Ana Air Base. From the same time period, visitors to the pavilion could enjoy archery, bowling, and my favorite, a waffle shop. Just visible above the McCoy Drug Company is their rooftop garden, available to passersby for a nominal fee from the late 30s to early 1940s. In the 1940s and 50s, many attempts were made to modernize the pavilion. The building slowly fell into almost total disrepair. The pavilion was saved by the Gronsky family, who replaced its understructure and most of its exterior. Much later, the building was sold to Phil Tozer, who with partners completed the interior restoration. The Balboa Theater's marquee advertises a double bill of the Glenn Miller Story and Tammy and the Bachelor. The theater, which opened as the Ritz in 1928, closed in 1992. After decades-long efforts to reopen it as a mixed-use performance art facility, the building is now for sale and will likely be demolished by its new owner. Well, it's completely up to the new owner. That's fantastic. I'm very happy to hear it. That's great. In 1928, the Balboa Beach Amusement Company built a rendezvous ballroom, signaling the beginning of the big band era in Balboa. The block-long building located on the ocean front between Washington and Palm Streets burned down in 1935 and was immediately rebuilt. The Ocean Swell Apartments, built in 1908 and seen here in 1911, occupied the southeast corner of Balboa Boulevard and A Streets, just beyond Everett Chase's Tent City. Note the presence of sidewalks before the paved roads. In 1953, Karam's hosted a fundraiser benefit for George Hoag to help open Hoag Hospital. At $100 a plate, over 125 people attended. Dillman's, one of John Wayne's favorite haunts, later occupied the building. Today, Cruiser's Pizza Bar and Grill occupies the same corner. Prior to 1900, Newport Bay was a hunter's paradise. The majority of visitors to the bay were lured by excellent duck hunting. On August 18, 1931, A.M. Hammond of Balboa caught this striped marlin swordfish weighing 692 pounds. At the time, it was the largest caught anywhere with standard tackle, length 13 feet 5 inches. These giant sea bass caught in Newport weighed a total of 600 pounds. The card promotes Newport Beach as the fishing spot where the big ones don't always get away. In its early years, Newport Harbor was filled with shallow lagoons, sandbars, and mudflats. The shallow draft of a canoe made it a safe mode of transport. By 1911, the harbor was home to some 200 rowboats and canoes. The Balboa Canoe Club, established in 1908, nominated Fred Beckwith as its first president. Beckwith was one of 16 harbor boosters who, in 1907, organized the Chamber of Commerce and pledged to the creation of a deep, navigable harbor. In 1923, a syndicate of Pasadena men purchased all of the land on the easterly extreme of the peninsula from Edna Ferguson, the widow of Joe Ferguson. The property was then subdivided, a map filed in May of 1923, and public improvements installed during the winter of 1923 and 24, after which an intense selling campaign began. The oceanfront boardwalk was constructed in 1917 and 18. It was the promenade connecting the villages of Balboa and Newport. In 1936, a concrete sidewalk replaced the deteriorating wooden boards. This card reads, "Dear Mother, I am finally in Balboa and having a grand time. The house I have marked is Mrs. Merrill's, where I am visiting. I have enjoyed the ocean so much and will hate to go home." The owner of this card numbered the houses along this section of the oceanfront and listed the families that resided there. The Daniels Cottage, the Evans Cottage, the Abbott Cottage, Mrs. Lindenberger's Cottage, an apartment house between Newport and Balboa, and the hills over at Corona del Mar. Swimmers rest on the 2-mile boardwalk, which in some spots was 2 feet above the sand. Young boys were known to crawl underneath, looking for loose change that had been dropped between the wooden boards. Seine fishing, seen here in a 1913 image, a popular tourist attraction, involved horses drawing smelt-filled nets onto the shore. A crowded day in Balboa in 1928. This image from 1916 illustrates the proximity of the shore to the cottages along the oceanfront. 20 years later, the narrow peninsula and beach were considerably widened by a project funded by the Works Project Administration. This card from 1921 reads, "Kenneth, this is the very picture of the beach at Balboa. We were down there a week ago last Sunday, and the people were just like this. The Newport Beach Hotel is visible at the center of this 1909 image, and the El Verano store is to the left. On the right, a train leaves the Newport Pier. On February 18, 1909, C.H. Grist requested permission from the Board of Trustees to erect power poles in the streets of the city. On March 1st, his request was granted, and the Newport Bay Electric Light and Power Company began supplying electricity to the citizens of Newport. A Navy ship anchored off Balboa's coast would be a surprising sight today, but not so in the 30s, when a Navy ship often participated in the annual Tournament of Lights celebration. In 1915, the Southern Pacific released this postcard. It reads, "The Pacific Newport is not, like its Atlantic namesake, an exclusive colony of millionaires. Here, rich and poor alike enjoy the surf and beaches of the mighty ocean." In its early days, Newport could not afford to maintain a corps of paid lifeguards. Novice bathers could take advantage of a safety line, a rope leading into the water from the beach. Finally, in 1920, 3 men were employed as lifeguards, but only on Sundays during the summer season and on special holidays. On May 28, 1923, Ordinance Number 278 passed, creating a lifeguard service. A lookout tower was constructed in front of the Balboa Oceanfront Bathhouse, and for 2 years, a small emergency hospital room was maintained in that building. This card reads, "Dear cousin, don't you wish you were here? I do. I am feeling fine again and trying to make up for lost time. I am sitting on the sand, drying my hair, as I have just been doing what you see these people doing." August 11th, 1911. In 1936, entrepreneur Al Anderson leased the bayfront area between Washington Street, Palm Street, and Bay Avenue from Fred Lewis. Anderson cleared the land and began putting up amusement features. He christened his new amusement park the Fun Zone. Over the years, he added more games, including bumper cars, a merry-go-round, and a Ferris wheel. Begun in 1935, the annual Flight of the Snowbirds was conducted by the Chamber of Commerce for boys and girls to stimulate interest in sailing among the youth of Newport Beach. It was so named because of the resemblance of over 100 sails to a flock of migrating snowbirds. This 1943 card focuses on McNally's Pier in the foreground, but also shows a USO club on the bay side, the Fun Zone, the Bayview Hotel, and the Harbor Masters Pier on the right. A fixture of the bay, the Pagoda House or China House stood sentinel near the mouth of the harbor for half a century. Slated for demolition in 1987, there was a last-ditch effort to gain protective status for the Pagoda House landmark, but the effort was too little too late. On March 9, 1912, the school district approved $27,000 for the construction of a new school between 13th and 14th Streets. The building contained 4 classrooms, an auditorium, a principal's office, a small library, and 2 rooms in the basement. In 1922, the school had outgrown its facilities and expanded to take up the whole block. On March 10, 1933, the Long Beach earthquake caused extensive damage and the building had to be demolished. A new school building, still in use today, was dedicated on December 17, 1935. My son just started 3rd grade there last week. In 1908, Venetian gondolier John Scarpa moved his gondolier business from Venice, California to Newport Bay. For several years, he took visitors and dignitaries around the harbor, serenading them in true Venetian style. By the early 1930s, Newport Bay was the leading pleasure harbor on the Pacific coast. A 1915 view of a women's group aboard the Rowena as they steer west parallel to the peninsula. Yeah, it's the same car that Conrad had. This is the old slave ship Fremont, seen here in 1919. Returning from a day of motion picture work at sea, the Fremont wrecked on the sandbar at the harbor entrance. The following Sunday, the ship, built in Philadelphia in 1852, was dynamited. A number of stock movie shots were made of the wreck, which appeared in films over the next several years. A view from the pavilion in 1921, with Bay Island visible in the distance. Visitors to this popular spot in 1915 could hire a launch to take them around the bay or to Rocky Point in Corona del Mar. For a nominal fee, 10 cottages were available for rent right on the bay. This three-masted ship was used in the 1924 silent film Captain Blood. 11 years later, Warner Brothers remade the film as a talkie starring Errol Flynn. Prior to the late 1930s, there was no speed limit in the bay. Two 35-foot boats, the Queen and the Miss California, with approximately 10 passengers each, would take off full speed from the pavilion, sirens blaring, and race out of the bay into the Pacific. Today, the speed limit is 5 miles per hour. The back of the card reads, "We are having a fine time. The electric pageant was gorgeous. Most everyone can swim, and the young folks are so tan." Venetian gondolier John Scarpa is credited with creating Balboa's first lighted boat parade, the Illuminated Light Parade, first held on August 23, 1908. It later took on names such as the Tournament of Lights, Pageant of Lights, and Festival of Lights. Originally held during the summer, it is now a fixture of the Christmas season. This image is from 1932. This card refers to Corona del Mar as the Riviera of America. In the 1890s, Edward J. Abbott brought soil from the mainland for planting these first trees on the peninsula, seen left in this image from 1908. The Abbotts planted palms, cypress, and eucalyptus trees. Also visible are a grocery store that also rented rooms and flats, a machine shop, and houses already appearing on Bay Island. I love the horse and buggy. Originally the South Seas Club, then the Palisades Restaurant, Art Lachelle draped the building with netting, added a dock, and introduced the Tahitian-style restaurant Christian's Hut. Known to be frequented by the likes of Errol Flynn, Humphrey Bogart, and Fred McMurray, unruly guests were often carried to the end of the dock and tossed into the bay. A 1944 aerial view of Lido Island, Newport, Balboa, and in the distance, Balboa Island, and the still vacant hills of Corona del Mar. The famous Arch Rock is positioned a short distance off the shore of Corona del Mar. This card reads, "I am down in Balboa, and I thought, being you hadn't written from Catalina, I thought I'd return good for evil." July 15th, 1908. Visitors could board a launch at the Balboa Pavilion to Corona del Mar. Those with the energy to ascend the bluffs were rewarded with a marvelous view of the ocean and harbor. Prior to the building of the Upper Bay Bridge in 1926, visitors to Newport had only two ways to reach Corona del Mar. They could boat across the harbor or take the long journey around the back bay. Newport's most adventurous visitors might row to Rocky Point, where gathering abalone was a popular activity. In 1904, needing funds for ranch improvements, James Irvine sold 700 acres on the bluffs behind Rocky Point to George E. Hart for $150 per acre. What a deal. The following year, work began on the 30-room Hotel Del Mar, which opened its doors on July 20th, 1907. The building had a bathroom on each floor, gas lighting, fireplaces, and a ladies' parlor. Verandas circled the hotel on three sides, allowing views of the ocean, bay, and hills for diners eating on the screened porches. In 1915, Hart traded 400 of the 700 acres he had purchased from the Irvine Ranch to the F.D. Cornell Company. The new owners remodeled the Hotel Del Mar and reopened it under the name Balboa Palisades Tavern. The Cornell Company attempted to change the name of the Corona Del Mar section to Balboa Palisades, but the new name never took hold. The treacherous harbor entrance and the east end of the peninsula are seen in this image. The pole near the top right marks the approximate current location of Granada and M Streets. Smuggler's Cove, 1908. Legends told of pirates hiding treasure in the caves of Corona del Mar, making their exploration another early popular attraction. Before the extension of the jetties in the late 1930s, Corona del Mar was known for its surfing, even hosting the Pacific Coast Surfboard Championship in 1928. The longer jetties ended the killer break at Corona del Mar, signaling the demise of surfing at that beach. K. Finch's Ceramics, Corona del Mar, 1952. From 1939 to 1963, artist K. Finch created hundreds of art pottery figurines, vases, banks, and planters. Her art depicted canine, feline, pastoral, woodland, zoological, holiday, nursery, and human subjects. In the years since, several books have been published about the artist and her work. On August 9, 1909, W.S. Collins got the first city ferry permit. Other operators followed, but the service was deemed unsatisfactory. Finally, in 1919, pioneer developer Joseph A. Beek won the city contract to operate the Balboa to Balboa Island ferry. In 1921, new ferries carried autos rather than pushing them on small barges. This image is from 1934.
I think it's fascinating here too. Look, you know, that building.
It does. Yeah. This is another view from 1958. And the ferry landing on South Bayfront from the same year. This image shows a thriving Balboa Island in 1953. But when W.S. Collins commenced a dredging operation of the island in 1906, it was primarily swampland, mostly underwater at high tide. The Grand Canal between Balboa Island and the Little Island is 1,500 feet long and 100 feet wide. It was originally meant to be Moonstone Avenue, but W.S. Collins wanted to create a Monte Carlo-style resort on the Little Island, with gondoliers transporting visitors across the Grand Canal. Concerned harbor boosters stopped Collins' resort idea, resulting in the island's unique configuration. Balboa Island's first bridge was a 12-foot wide wooden structure built in 1914. That was replaced by a wider bridge that stood from 1924 to 1928. This image was taken in 1929, just prior to the construction of the third bridge. It was 400 feet long with 4-foot wide sidewalks. A 1937 view of the new bridge. And another in 1942. With the harbor dredging in 1935 and 36, and the construction of the promenade and bulkhead in 1937, property values increased significantly on the island. The end of the war in 1945 resulted in a population explosion, as thousands of servicemen from the Santa Ana Air Base moved to Newport, and particularly Balboa Island. This contributed greatly to Newport's transformation from a summer getaway to a town of full-time residents. The Southland Sailing Club was organized in 1922 with I.B. Potter as its first commodore. For 3 years, the club met in various locations on the peninsula until the spring of 1925, when a clubhouse was built on the corner of the island, pictured here. In 1928, the Southland Sailing Club changed its name to the Balboa Yacht Club. Throughout its existence, the club has done much to promote the sport of sailing. Allen's Pharmacy on Marine Avenue in 1941, the perfect spot for fountain service on a hot day. The eucalyptus trees that line Marine Avenue were planted in the early 1930s. The Jolly Roger restaurant, seen left in this image, was popular for many years. I still remember the kids' menu that doubled as a pirate hat. The promenade on North Bayfront was captured in this 1960 postcard, and South Bayfront in 1965. The Bay Island Clubhouse, circa 1912. Bay Island was originally a small knoll surrounded by overflow lands and reached by a long plank trestle extending from the present location of Bay Avenue. Dredging began in 1909, and in 1910 the footbridge to the island was built. The footbridge was affectionately known as the Little White Bridge. By 1930 there were 23 homes on the small island. In 1908, Helena Modjeska, the great Polish actress, bought this pagoda-style house at 3 Bay Island. When she died the following year, the Pacific Electric sent a large black private railroad car to East Newport to meet the procession, carrying her coffin across the Little White Bridge. The Inner Bay from Port Orange Heights, 1907. Port Orange, also known as McFadden's Landing, was comprised of a dock and small warehouse built by D.M. Dorman and Captain Dunnels. In 1873, it was purchased by the McFaddens to support their burgeoning lumber company. The Inland Passage, 1907. The Upper Newport Bay is an estuary, a place where fresh and saltwater meet and mix. As one of the few remaining estuaries in Southern California, it is home to nearly 200 species of birds, including several endangered species. During the winter, as many as 30,000 birds can be seen here on any given day. This 1916 image is from the 5th Annual National Orange Show in San Bernardino and shows the second place winner that year. Hundreds of oranges arranged in the shape of Newport Harbor, including Balboa Island and Bay Island. The National Orange Show continues to this day. Newport Harbor High School, circa 1931. The high school opened in 1930 with 200 students and 24 faculty members. Mosaic murals in the quad were completed as a WPA project. Originally built as a restaurant and service station, construction on the arches began in 1925, the same year PCH opened between Huntington Beach and Newport. It was named by 10-year-old Victor Chatton in a contest advertised in the Balboa Times. This image is from the mid-1960s. Yeah, I'll take it. Aerial view of Richards Lido Market, circa 1955. Opened in 1946, the market's motto was service, variety, quality, and honesty. This unique shopping experience, which included an organist playing shoppers' requests, earned the store the 1954 Retail Store of the Year award. Also visible is the Lido Theater, built in 1939 and still going strong today. In 1948, a consortium led by K.T. Kendall founded the Balboa Bay Club. This family membership club was built on land used during the war as mooring for a fleet of old schooners used for offshore anti-submarine patrol. The club became a favorite hideaway for the likes of John Wayne, Humphrey Bogart, Lauren Bacall, Robert Wagner, Natalie Wood, and Barry Goldwater. Kings, prime ministers, and presidents have enjoyed the club's ambience and hospitality. I'm not sure what this image has to do with the Buffalo Ranch, but the Buffalo Ranch was a tourist attraction operated from 1955 to 1960. Several Native American families from Kansas were invited to live in the area and work at the ranch to add to its authenticity and present various tribal dances for the tourists. Bison Road, which exists today as a connection between Jamboree and MacArthur Roads, was originally created as an access point for the Buffalo Ranch. The ranch closed in late 1959. Balboa Boulevard and Palm Street. Born in Greece, Gus came to America in 1907. He enlisted in the U.S. Navy in 1918 and fought for his adoptive country in World War I. The cafe building still stands, now operated as a bike rental shop. Newport Harbor, playground of the Southwest, circa 1931. This card reads, with a landlocked bay and miles of clean sandy beach with a climate unsurpassed 12 months of the year in all of America, Newport Balboa is a playground supreme. Twice in its history, attempts have been made to change our city's name. A 1937 city proposition to change the name from Newport Beach to Balboa failed, 1,014 votes to 581. In 1958, a charter amendment to change the city's name to Newport Harbor also failed to be adopted. And last but certainly not least, Main Street facing the pavilion in 1914. My favorite postcard of them all. I can't tell you how much time I've spent examining this image with a magnifying glass. The American flags on the card on the left cluing us in this is almost certainly the 4th of July. The women lifting the hem of their long dresses slightly as they scale the steps of the pavilion. The lineup for candy and ice cream sold on the first floor. Look at this card long enough and you can't help but feel that you could step right into the scene, tip your hat to passersby, and parade around the pavilion's balcony. And that's it. Thank you very much. We'd be happy to answer any questions if anybody has any.
I just like to say the transportation is fabulous. The island on Balboa in the summer and Eagle Rock across the street from Occidental College. And if there was a birthday party or something up there, I could go on the ferry, get on the red car, go to downtown Los Angeles, walk 2 blocks, get on a yellow car, and go straight to Eagle Rock. And I don't know why they put away and all that.
It's all about money.
Well, it was ideal.
Yeah. No, I mean, we live on the boulevard on the peninsula, about halfway between the piers. And I often think how cool it would be if the red car was still going down Balboa Boulevard and we could jump on it and go up to Pasadena for the day. But things change. Right. Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions for me or Conrad? Thank you very much for your attention. I appreciate it.
It's so interesting, and all of the history that comes through and the photos and things we would never be able to see otherwise, so it's great. Anyway, thank you again, and hopefully you'll continue to support us during these programs. Anyway, you probably are ready to have some refreshments or a glass of wine or whatever. But I have to make one little plug for our retail store that we forced you to go into tonight. And so today we just received our first, we designed a Balboa Island charm on a pendant or a bracelet. And so you might want to look at those inside. So the retail store is going to help support the museum going forward. Yes.